My name is Leona Hale. I'm 33 years old. And the night everything quietly changed was the night my father told me not to speak. It was my parents' 50th wedding anniversary. The Clarendon estate was lit like a champagne ad. Gold lights strung across the garden, servers in white gloves gliding between guests, and floral arrangements that smelled more expensive than sentimental. I stood by the cocktail bar, sipping a wine I didn't choose, wearing a deep Merlot silk dress that my mother had side-eyed earlier and called too loud to be taken seriously. Then came my father's voice, low, controlled, sharp enough to puncture every word I didn't say. "Leona," he said, glancing past me toward the guests, "do us all a favor and skip the speeches tonight. You're already the best at making this family look bad." My fingers froze on the glass stem. My mother shifted napkins that didn't need fixing. My brother laughed from across the lawn, probably repeating one of his pre-rehearsed deal stories. My sister looked down, her phone suddenly fascinating. No one looked at me, not really. But I'd never been truly seen in this family anyway. I didn't speak, didn't argue, didn't cry. I just placed the wine down gently, like it might explode, and turned to leave the circle of manicured perfection. That's when I bumped into someone. He was standing just outside the tent, near the stone walkway. Tall, composed, dark jacket, gray at the temples. His posture said military, but his eyes said not here to impress. "I'm so sorry," I said quickly. He held out a steady hand. "Don't be." Then he smiled slightly and added, "I've never seen someone stand so tall in a place built to make people feel so small." That line, it hit harder than anything my father had ever said. "Not with the family, I take it?" I asked. "God, no." He chuckled. "I'm Eli Marshall, friend of Colonel Hannah. She owed me a favor, so she invited me to repay it via overpriced appetizers and underwhelming sincerity." I shook his hand. Leona, black sheep, daughter of the hosts, currently debating a quiet escape. He grinned, my favorite kind of guest. We walked a little toward the edge of the garden, where the music felt far away. The kind of quiet that doesn't just mean silence, but safety. "I used to work in military signal analysis," I told him, surprising myself. "Intercepts, decryption, pattern recognition, mostly to find meaning in chaos." "Still do, apparently," he said, motioning back toward the party. "And you?" "Former cyber defense advisor. These days, coffee, books, and avoiding meetings with too many acronyms." We shared a soft laugh. It was the first time I'd laughed that day, and meant it. I didn't know then that Eli had once advised the Joint Chiefs, or that he had walked away from it all not because he was bitter, but because he believed peace should feel earned, not maintained by fear. I didn't know he'd one day kneel in the same garden, in the snow, with a velvet box and quiet eyes that didn't ask for anything but the truth. I just knew. He didn't flinch when I spoke. He didn't edit my thoughts in real time. And he didn't ask me to shrink so he could feel tall. That night, something shifted, not loudly, not with fireworks, just a quiet click in my chest that said, "Enough." That was the night I stopped trying to belong at their table. And the night I unknowingly met the man who'd helped me build my own. I didn't become invisible all at once. It happened slowly, like water dripping through fabric, fading the color until nothing was left but threads. Growing up in the Hale family wasn't harsh. It was precise, polite, and punishing in ways no one would ever call cruel. My brother Graham was the golden son. He played piano with military discipline by age 10, graduated top of his class at Yale, and once gave a TED Talk at 16 titled, "The Future of Efficient Intelligence." My sister Madeline was the perfect middle. Ballet, biology, benevolence. Partnered with a venture capitalist before 25, wore soft beige cardigans and never once raised her voice at dinner. And me. I was the child who colored outside the lines, and then repainted the wall. The one who rearranged living room furniture at 7 because energy flow matters, Mom. The one who cried when the neighbor cut down a tree and refused to eat dinner for 2 nights in protest. They called me sensitive. They meant too much. In school, when I won an art scholarship for a mural I painted on the gym wall, my father's only comment was, Try doing that on a spreadsheet sometime. That's a skill you can sell. When I scored in the top 3% nationally for spatial logic, my mother smiled gently and said, "That's sweet, dear, but be careful. Men don't like women who overthink the furniture." Every time I did something that didn't fit their mold, the house grew quieter. No arguments, no yelling, just a polite silence, like I'd committed some aesthetic offense by simply existing in full color. At dinner, Graham would talk about strategy, mergers, profit margins. Madeline would mention foundation galas or legal work in South Africa. I'd talk about restoring a century-old barn I was volunteering to help rebuild. The silence after I spoke wasn't cold. It was ambient, like I'd never said anything at all. Once, I built a custom herb wall for my mother's kitchen, recycled wood, built-in LED grow lights, labeled copper tags with her favorite basil and rosemary. I stenciled her initials in the corner. She glanced at it the way someone looks at a well-folded towel. "That's very you," she said. The same day, Madeline brought over a designer handbag. The room lit up like someone had walked in with royalty. I learned something that afternoon. Some things are seen, some things are visible. They are not the same. At 19, I left home early, enlisted with Army intelligence. They didn't ask me to stay, not because they were angry, but because I think they honestly didn't notice I was leaving. I served 6 years, specialized in encrypted signal mapping, worked in rooms with no windows and computers that hummed like secrets. Once, I identified a rogue frequency that led to the extraction of an entire medical unit overseas. My name wasn't in the briefing, but my co shook my hand and said, "You saved people today." And I realized that was more than I'd ever heard at any Hale family dinner. When I came home on leave, I showed them a photograph. A metal plate engraved with my name and service ID. My father said, "Huh, so you're decoding stuff." Then turned to Graham to ask about his newest hedge fund. My mother served lemon tart that night. No one asked where I had been deployed. They weren't cruel, they were composed. And I was simply the background art in a gallery that only honored oil paintings of men in suits and women in pearls. Over time, I stopped sharing. Not out of spite, but because handing your light to people who keep turning away is its own kind of exhaustion. So I stayed away. Sent holiday cards, showed up for birthdays with gifts that were more practical than personal, smiled when I was supposed to smile, laughed in the places where people pause for laughter, and slowly, quietly, I learned how to disappear without ever leaving the room. Until that night. That garden. That man. The one who saw me not as the echo of someone else's disappointment, but as a whole sentence. Complete. Eli didn't ask me to explain why I never talked about home. He just noticed the way I avoided centerpieces and flinched at certain praise. One night early on, I asked him, "What if I never become the version of success my family understands?" He shrugged. "Then maybe the version they understand isn't big enough to hold you." And that, right there, was the first time I realized I didn't have to fit into their blueprint. I could burn it and draft my own. The last time I saw my father laugh, he was cutting off my voice mid-sentence. It was during the anniversary dinner, same night I met Eli. We'd moved inside. Candlelight flickered across polished mahogany. The wine was flowing. The air was syrupy with self-congratulation. My sister Madeline gave a flawless toast. 50 years of love, structure, and excellence, she said. The room clinked glasses in unison like trained hands at a recital. Graham followed with a slideshow set to Bach, family ski trips, academic medals, tasteful wedding shots, filtered just enough to erase the inconvenient edges. Then someone, probably Aunt Colleen, called out across the table. "Leona, dear, your turn." I froze for a second, fork hovering over roasted duck. I hadn't planned to speak, I never did, but maybe this once, I could offer something honest, so I stood. My palms buzzed. My heart knocked against my ribs like it wanted to run first. "I don't have a speech prepared," I began, "but I just wanted to say thank you for showing us that love can last, even when." That's as far as I got. My father cut in, glass raised high. "Let's skip the poetry tonight, shall we? Let's keep it festive. The room burst into soft, relieved laughter. Aunt Colleen giggled. Graham smirked. Even my mother smiled tightly and looked down at her plate like it had answers. I didn't sit down right away. I just stood there, quiet, holding back nothing, holding back everything. I scanned their faces, their perfectly arranged expressions, their curated reactions. And then I saw Eli. He didn't speak. He didn't look away. He just waited. That's when I sat down, not because I gave up, but because I knew something none of them did. That would be the last time I ever attended a Hale family function. No announcement, no exit speech, no storming off with shattered glasses or thrown chairs. I stayed until dessert, ate half a slice of lemon tart, nodded politely as Graham explained his latest acquisition, pretended not to notice Madeline's passive dig about life choices that don't scale. Then I left, stepped out into the cold night air, wrapped my shawl over my shoulders, and walked across the gravel path. No one followed. No one called after me. I got in my car. Eli was already inside, quietly like always. He handed me a thermos of tea. "Do you want to talk about it?" he asked gently. "No," I whispered, "not tonight." Instead, I stared out the window as the lights of the estate faded in the rearview mirror. And something inside me, something I'd carried for years, exhaled for the first time. It didn't feel like rebellion. It felt like release. Over the next few weeks, I stopped answering group texts. I missed Graham's birthday. Didn't RSVP to Madeline's charity brunch. Let Mother's Day slip by with a short email and no phone call. At first, they noticed. A message from my mom, "Everything okay? You've been quiet." Then Madeline, "Don't isolate again, Leona. We're still family." Then silence. And that, oddly, was the gift. Without their noise, without the invisible assignment of being the disappointing daughter, I could finally hear my own voice. I moved out of the city, found a coastal town where no one knew the Hales, rented a loft above a florist shop, painted the walls myself, started my own design consulting studio, small, focused, built on breathability, on space that let people feel seen. I worked on homes, wellness retreats, quiet rooms for noisy minds. And slowly, the work started to find me back. A blog feature, then a conference invite, then a message from an architecture firm that said, "Your rooms make people exhale." And Eli, he never asked me to be more than I was. He brought coffee, fixed leaky faucets, let me fall apart on hard days without trying to fix me. One evening, I came home late, exhausted, mud on my shoes, dried paint on my elbow. He looked up from the stove, tilted his head, and smiled. "You look like someone who finally owns her time," he said. I smiled back, and in that moment I realized I hadn't disappeared. I'd simply stopped performing, stopped auditioning for a seat at a table that never planned to let me eat. My exit wasn't a scream. It was a door I closed quietly behind me. And when I looked around at the new space I had built, I didn't feel alone, I felt home. Comebacks don't always start with fireworks. Sometimes they begin with a blank wall, a roll of painter's tape, and your sleeves rolled up at 11:43 p.m. After I left the Hale orbit, I didn't chase success, I rebuilt it, 1 square foot at a time. The loft above the flower shop was small, but it was mine. There were mornings when the smell of lavender drifted through the vents. Evenings where I worked by candlelight because I hadn't installed the new fixtures yet. It was messy, real, sacred. I started consulting again, quietly, nothing flashy. Just spaces that breathed. Bedrooms for people with insomnia. Kitchens for women who felt too anxious to eat alone. Office nooks for men who didn't know how to stop apologizing for needing stillness. I specialized in peace. Word traveled, not fast, not viral, just enough. A therapist's office in Portland. A wellness retreat center in Colorado. Then a grief recovery nonprofit asked if I could design a healing space for widows and veterans. That one changed everything. I spent 6 months on it. No templates, no shortcuts. Every shelf, every light, every inch of flooring was intentional. I treated it like a whisper, "You matter, you're safe. You're allowed to exhale here." The day it opened, a local blogger posted a photo of the entryway, sunlight pouring through a round window, dancing on white oak floors. The caption read, "This isn't just interior design. This is emotional architecture." I read it 5 times, not because I was surprised, but because it was the first time someone had named what I'd been building. Then came the email. Subject: Feature Opportunity, Hearth and Form Magazine. They wanted to profile me for their fall edition. A spread called Women Who Build Differently. My first instinct? Say no, stay hidden, don't draw the Hale spotlight again. But Eli, who just gotten home from a trip, saw the hesitation in my eyes. He set his bag down, looked at me, and said, "You're not hiding, you're blooming, let them see." So I said yes. The interview was honest. I didn't name names. But I told the truth. About designing for the overlooked. About spaces that aren't about status, but restoration. About how sometimes the places we leave shape us just as much as the ones we build. The article dropped on a Tuesday. 4 pages. Photos of me barefoot in my studio, light slanting across raw canvas and half-built mood boards. Paint on my fingers. Eyes calm, no performance. The headline: Leona Hale, 33, Architect of Breath. It went quietly viral. Old professors emailed. Former military colleagues sent messages. Even a woman I met at a cafe years ago wrote, "Your story gave me permission to walk away from people who never clapped for me." I didn't post about it, but others did, including Eli, who simply wrote, "She built a world they said she never belonged to and invited the rest of us in." And then, of course, the Hales noticed. It started with a text from Madeline. "Saw the magazine, you could have told us." Then Graham tagged me in an old family photo on Facebook with a caption that read, "Some people forget their roots." And my father, he emailed. No greeting, no warmth, just, "We saw the spread. You've embarrassed this family enough. It looks like you're trying to erase where you came from. Be mindful. People are watching." I stared at the message for a long time, not with anger, not even hurt, just clarity. They weren't upset I was succeeding. They were upset I no longer needed them to validate it. For the first time, they weren't the narrators of my story, and that made me dangerous. I didn't respond. Not because I was avoiding conflict, but because I no longer owed them an explanation for existing. Instead, I planned something else. I called it The Gathering, a private dinner, 30 guests, all handwritten invitations. People who had seen me, not edited me. Clients who trusted me with their healing. Mentors who reminded me I was too much. Friends who never asked me to shrink to be invited. I hosted it in the home Eli and I had just purchased, a 2-story glass and cedar build tucked between pines and sky. He found it one morning and said, "This feels like a place you could breathe your whole story out loud." The night of the dinner, the air was cool. We strung lights through the trees, set a long table with linen and candles, played soft jazz, served warm food in handmade ceramic bowls, and when everyone sat down, I stood to speak. Not to prove anything, just to say thank you. This table doesn't exist because I won something. It exists because I finally stopped asking for permission to be here. No applause, just stillness. That night, someone snapped a photo of me, standing barefoot on the deck, dress fluttering, Eli beside me with his hand resting gently at my back. The caption? "She was never lost, just never allowed to lead." It didn't trend, it didn't explode. It just settled, like truth often does, and for the first time, I wasn't waiting to be seen. I had already seen myself. It happened on a quiet Sunday morning. The kind with soft fog and no rush. The kind where the whole world feels like it's holding its breath, just for you. I had been working on the new studio all weekend, painting shelves, taping off trim, rearranging plants like puzzle pieces only I could solve. When I finally stumbled downstairs, barefoot and dusty, Eli was already in the kitchen. He was making coffee. Real, French press coffee, not the rushed kind you pour while checking your email. He looked up when I entered, not surprised. Just calm, like he'd been waiting for this exact moment. "You've got something in your hair," he said, setting a mug down for me. I reached up. "Is it paint?" "Nope, it's you," he said. And for some reason, that silly line made me smile bigger than I'd smiled in weeks. We sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, mugs warming our hands. The fog moved through the pines like a secret. Then Eli stood up. "I want to show you something," he said. I followed him to the back of the property, past the raised garden beds, the cedar swing we built last fall, and the gravel path we laid together by hand. There, under a small wooden pergola strung with lights, was a table. Just one chair, just one candle, and a velvet box. He didn't make a speech, didn't drop to one knee right away. He just looked at me. And in that quiet, filled with wind and wood smoke and every version of myself I had ever carried, he said, "You've spent your whole life trying to prove you were worth choosing. But Leona, I don't love you because you earned it. I love you because I see you, all of you. And I don't want to stand beside you because it's convenient. I want to stand beside you because you built something real. Not just these spaces, but this life, this freedom. You made a home where you didn't ask anyone for permission. So now I'm asking you, not for a wedding, not for a timeline, just for the honor of building the rest of it with you." Then and only then he knelt down. No pressure, no audience, no grand performance. Just one man, steady, honest, offering everything without needing to reshape me first. And I didn't cry, I didn't shake, I just knelt down too, right there with him, pressed my forehead to his, and whispered, yes. Not because I needed to be rescued, but because I had already rescued myself. Because he didn't hand me a new identity, he mirrored back the one I'd fought so long to protect. Because finally, I was being loved in my own language. Silence, presence, freedom. We didn't post it, didn't call the family. We just went back inside, barefoot and grinning like kids who had just built a fort out of blankets and promises. Later that week, I found a note folded under my pillow. It was Eli's handwriting, clean, all caps, military sharp, but the words were gentle. "I never needed you to be softer. I just needed to know where you stood. And you stood taller than anyone I've ever known." That night, I fell asleep with my hand over my heart, the ring tucked inside the drawer beside my bed, because it wasn't about the diamond. It was about what it symbolized. Not "I own you." Not "you complete me," but "I see you. And I want to be where you are, exactly as you are." I didn't post the engagement. No announcement, no ring photo, no cryptic captions. But somehow, they found out. Maybe it was the mutual friend who saw us that weekend, or the florist who tagged my name in a photo of two people so obviously in love it hurts. Either way, the first signal came quietly, just like all warnings in my life always had. A text from my mother. "We saw something online. Is it true?" I didn't answer right away. Not out of spite, but because I was busy folding laundry and choosing cabinet handles for the new studio Eli and I were building, handles that, for once, didn't require anyone's approval but mine. Then Madeline chimed in. "You're getting married, really, without even telling us." Graham followed 2 hours later. "Look, it's fine if you want to do your own thing, Leona, but this feels performative." That word, performative, it tasted like lemon in an open wound. I thought about responding, thought about explaining that this wasn't performance, it was peace, but I'd played that role before. The explainer, the justifier, the bridge. I wasn't that woman anymore. So I left it on read. 2 days later, my father broke the silence with an email. Subject, a matter of family. "Leona, I hope this message finds you well. Your mother and I are disappointed to learn, secondhand, that you've made such a significant life decision without involving us. I don't know what narrative you've been building, but know this, people talk. You may be finding success now, but don't forget where you came from. This family still matters. Be careful." Be careful, like a threat disguised in civility. Like I was a child walking too close to the edge of his illusion of control. I didn't respond, because here's the truth, the shift had already happened. They just didn't realize they were no longer in the center of my orbit. I wasn't seeking their approval. I wasn't avoiding their disapproval. I simply wasn't playing anymore, and that, I think, is what scared them most. Power, real power, doesn't need to prove itself. It just quietly rearranges the room. After that email, things got oddly loud for a family known for its silence. Madeline posted a throwback photo on Instagram, the three of us as kids at a family picnic. Her caption read, "No matter how far we go, family is still our root system." Graham followed with a LinkedIn post, of all places, about leadership and loyalty. The Hale way, the right way. And then my father, who hadn't written a public opinion since his retirement, posted a blog entry on the Family Foundation's site. The title, Legacy Over Noise. Subtle, predictable, hollow, none of it said my name, all of it screamed my presence. They were trying to regain control of a narrative they had long since lost, but something strange happened this time. I didn't flinch, I didn't shrink. In fact, I smiled because this wasn't a war, it was a rebalancing. They weren't angry at my choices, they were mourning their monopoly. They weren't grieving the distance, they were grieving their inability to edit me. I was no longer the daughter who begged to be included. I was the woman who had stopped knocking and built her own front door, and people noticed. Not just friends, not just colleagues, strangers, women messaged me. "You remind me of who I was before I started apologizing for my dreams." Veterans emailed Eli, "Whatever she's building, we feel it. Thank you for holding the line beside her." Even one of Graham's former business partners reached out with a private message. "I always knew you were the smartest, Hale. You just didn't talk over people." So I didn't respond to my father's email, but I did post something else. A photo, not of the ring, not of the house, not even of Eli and me, just a chair, an empty chair, at a long wooden table I had designed from reclaimed ash and walnut. Caption, "You don't need to burn the bridge, you just stop crossing it." No hashtags, no comments enabled, they saw it, I know they did, and this time. They said nothing, no guilt texts, no passive-aggressive family brunch invites, just silence. But not mine, theirs, the kind of silence that means, "We don't know who you are anymore," and deep down, "We know you don't need us to know." Leona didn't just heal quietly. She began building something that lived beyond her. 1. She launched a scholarship. Named after a fellow female officer who died during a rescue mission, the D.S. Morales Fund supports young women entering cybersecurity and signal intelligence programs. Each award came with a note, hand-signed by Leona. "The world doesn't need you to be less, just clear." The fund was quiet, efficient, and fully funded for 10 years within 6 months. Thanks to one keynote she gave at a Veterans Leadership Summit. 2. She mentored women leaving the military. Once a month, she met privately with female vets starting over, those who didn't want to wear medals on LinkedIn, who didn't know how to translate discipline into dream jobs. She taught them how to reframe, "I was in logistics," into, "I led 70 under pressure in 3 countries." She didn't lecture, she listened, and always ended with one question, "What space do you wish existed for you?" Then she helped them build it. 3. She testified before Congress. When invited to speak at a Senate hearing on civilian data protection, she almost declined. Eli said, "Don't do it to be seen, do it so others can be." She did. In a charcoal blazer, no makeup, voice calm, she told the committee, "I used to find the signals no one else could. But the most important one I ever decoded was this: people don't need control, they need to feel safe." The transcript was quoted in 2 national papers, but she never retweeted it. She just went home, fed the sourdough starter, watered the rosemary, and opened her inbox. 5 emails, all from women. All variations of the same message. "I didn't know someone like you could exist until today." Leona didn't chase legacy. She made it breathable. And somehow, in the process of becoming exactly who she needed years ago, she became that for someone else. It was a Wednesday in early fall. The garden still held onto summer, but the air had begun to cool. Leona was pruning the rosemary when the car pulled up. Not loud, not aggressive. Just a black sedan parked quietly at the edge of the gravel. Out stepped Madeline. Not in heels, not in pearls. Just jeans, flats, and a nervous half-smile Leona hadn't seen in years. She didn't bring a bottle of wine, or a speech. Just a small cloth bag. Inside was a folded piece of paper, an old sketch. Leona's first blueprint, drawn in pencil at age 16. A house with high windows, a hidden reading loft, and the words, "One day, maybe." Madeline looked up, eyes softer than Leona remembered. I found this cleaning out Mom's desk. She kept it all this time. I thought you should have it. Leona took it, not with forgiveness, but with curiosity. They sat on the porch. No apologies, no explanations, just tea, silence, and the scent of rosemary between them. Finally, Madeline asked, "How did you know when it was time to stop asking to be accepted?" Leona stared out across the trees. "When I realized acceptance wasn't the same as love, and love doesn't ask you to prove anything." Madeline nodded, slowly, gratefully. "I'm not here to fix anything," she said, "but I want to understand, if you'll let me." Leona didn't answer right away. She just reached for the extra mug. "I always make two," she said, "just in case someone shows up ready to listen." This wasn't a reunion, it was a beginning. Quiet, uneven, but honest. And for the first time in years. The past knocked, and Leona didn't need to lock the door. If you've ever been the quiet one in the room, the one they underestimated, overlooked, or talked over, then this story was for you. And maybe, just maybe, it reminded you that you don't have to explain yourself to be valid. You don't have to burn bridges to be free. You just have to build a table where you don't apologize for existing. If that spoke to something inside you, leave it in the comments or write, "I'm building my own table." And don't forget to subscribe, because this isn't just a story, it's a mirror, and maybe next time, it'll be yours.